The last place I expected to have my entire marriage turned upside down was in aisle 7 of Baxter's Home Improvement, right between the overpriced light fixtures and the seasonal lawn decorations. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you at the least convenient moments, like when you're holding a 10-pack of LED bulbs and a guy you haven't seen in 15 years casually mentions that your wife is dating someone else. I wasn't even supposed to be at Baxter's that day. My original plan had been simple: go to work, finish early, and spend the evening on the couch with a cold beer and the firm belief that my life was perfectly normal. But no, Amy had left me a list. A long one. The kind that somehow turns a 5-minute errand into a full-blown pilgrimage. So there I was, squinting at a row of light bulbs, wondering why humanity had managed to put people on the moon but still couldn't standardize wattage sizes, when I heard someone behind me say, "Jacob Henderson?" No way. I turned, expecting to see an old high school friend or a former coworker who wanted to catch up about absolutely nothing. Instead, it was Greg Lawson, an old neighbor from when Amy and I lived in our first apartment. The kind of guy who always needed to borrow things but never returned them. His main personality trait had been an impressive ability to show up at barbecues he wasn't invited to. He looked exactly the same, except now he had a beer gut and a receding hairline, which somehow made him even more confident. He grinned like we were long-lost brothers. "Man, I haven't seen you since the old place," he said, slapping my shoulder like he'd just won a prize for recognizing me. I gave him a polite nod, already bracing for whatever favor he was about to ask. "Yeah, it's been a while. How's life?" "Can't complain," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You still with Amy?" That was the first red flag. People don't usually ask that question unless they already know the answer. "Yeah," I said, drawing the word out. "Why?" Greg laughed. A short, knowing laugh. The kind that made my stomach tighten for reasons I couldn't explain yet. No reason. Just, thought maybe things had changed. There it was. The thing he wanted to say but was waiting for me to drag out of him. I sighed, already tired of whatever game this was. "Greg, I'm gonna need you to skip to the part where you tell me why you think my marriage is suddenly a community discussion." He scratched his chin. "Look, man, I don't want to start anything, but I see Amy sometimes. You know, out and about. Out and about. Not exactly a crime." "Okay." Greg hesitated, then let out a breath. "Look, I saw her at the Redfield a few times." I blinked. The Redfield was a hotel. A nice one. Not exactly the kind of place you grab a casual coffee unless you enjoy spending $12 on something served in a mug too small for normal human consumption. My mind started rearranging puzzle pieces I didn't even know were on the table. Amy had been working late a lot. She'd been taking weekend, personal days that I hadn't questioned because I wasn't the kind of husband who thought his wife needed a permission slip to go enjoy herself. But now I had a growing suspicion that my trust had been misplaced. Greg must have seen something shift in my expression because he quickly raised his hands. "Hey, man, maybe it's nothing. Just thought you knew." I didn't know, but now I had to. I left Baxter's without buying a single thing from Amy's list, which I was sure I'd hear about later. Instead, I drove straight to the Redfield. Not because I was planning some grand confrontation, but because I needed to see something, anything, that could confirm or deny the knot tightening in my chest. I parked across the street and sat there for a while, debating whether I was being completely ridiculous. It was entirely possible Greg was mistaken. Maybe he saw someone who looked like Amy. Maybe she'd had an innocent reason to be there. Maybe I should have just gone home, turned on the game, and continued believing my life was the same as it had always been. But curiosity is a nasty thing. Once it's there, it doesn't let go. After 20 minutes of trying to talk myself out of it, I got out of the car and walked inside. The lobby smelled like expensive cologne and a kind of cleanliness that suggested someone was paid an uncomfortable amount of money to keep everything spotless. A man in a crisp suit stood behind the check-in desk, giving me the polite but distant look of someone who had been trained to read a situation before engaging. I walked up, keeping my tone casual. "Hey, weird question. Do you guys have a lost and found?" The man smiled. "Of course. What did you lose?" A little part of me cringed at what I was about to say. Actually, my wife stayed here recently, and I think she left something. I was hoping you might have it." The man nodded. "Name?" "Amy Henderson." He turned to his computer, fingers clicking across the keyboard. After a few seconds, he frowned slightly. "I don't see an Amy Henderson registered in our system." I let out a slow breath. Okay. Maybe Greg was wrong. Maybe Amy hadn't been here after all. Then the man added, though, we do have an Amy Powell. I stared at him, the world tilting slightly. Amy Powell. Powell was Amy's maiden name. She hadn't checked in as Amy Henderson, my wife. She'd checked in as Amy Powell. The man must have seen something in my face because he hesitated. Was that the name she might have used? I forced a smile, though my stomach felt like it had been yanked out of my body. Yeah, that's probably it. He nodded, relaxing again. She had a room here last weekend. Did she lose something specific? My grip tightened on the edge of the desk. No, I said, voice light. I just wanted to check. Thanks. I walked out of the Redfield, my entire body running cold. Last weekend, Amy had told me she was at a spa with her friends. She had even sent me a picture of a towel-wrapped head and a glass of wine next to a perfectly arranged cheese board. I hadn't questioned it, because why would I? But now, I had questions. A lot of them. And I was going to get answers. I never liked being the guy who snoops. It's one of those things that always seemed beneath me, something insecure people did when they couldn't trust their partner. And yet, there I was, sitting in my truck outside a hotel I had no business being at, realizing that maybe, just maybe, I had been a little too confident in my marriage. I hadn't planned on coming back that night. After the whole Amy Powell revelation at the front desk, I had driven home, sat in the garage for 10 minutes staring at the steering wheel like it was going to give me life advice, then went inside and did what any sane man would do. I went to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and pretended none of it had happened. Maybe it was some kind of mistake. Maybe she had used her old name for a perfectly logical, non-affair-related reason. And maybe I had suddenly developed a strong belief in fairy tales. The problem was, once you see something, you can't unsee it. The whole night, Amy was her usual self, chatty, a little too interested in a home renovation show we both knew we'd never actually do anything from, asking me if I remembered to buy the right kind of trash bags. Normal stuff. But normal wasn't working for me anymore. So, the next morning, when she kissed me goodbye and left for work, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. Let me be clear, this was not my proudest moment. I didn't even have a solid plan. What was I expecting? That she'd drive straight to a secret boyfriend's house wearing a neon sign that said, "Welcome to the Betrayal Tour"? No. Most likely, she'd go to work, and I'd feel like a fool for thinking otherwise. But I needed to see it for myself. Amy's office was a small dental clinic in a strip mall between a yoga studio and one of those haircut chains that somehow always smells like burnt hair. She worked reception, which meant she spent most of her day rescheduling people who never actually showed up to their appointments. I parked a few spots away, out of view, and watched her car. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then, instead of going inside, she walked back out and got into another car. It wasn't a coworker's. It wasn't a rideshare. It was a black sedan with tinted windows, because of course, whoever she was meeting had to be a little dramatic. Now, let's pause for a second here. At this point, a reasonable man might have confronted her, might have walked up to the car, knocked on the window, and asked her what in the world was going on. But I wasn't feeling reasonable. I was feeling the kind of suspicion that makes you want to play things smart. So I followed them. They drove across town to a different parking lot, this one in front of a cafe I had never been to, the kind of place that served coffee with complicated names and charged an extra $3 if you wanted something made with almond milk. I parked a few spots away and watched as Amy and Mr. Mystery Man got out of the car. Now, here's the thing. When you suspect your wife is cheating, you imagine the worst. You picture some muscular gym guy who looks like he was carved from stone, or a rich businessman who orders wine without looking at the price. You do not expect to see a guy like this. He was average looking. I'm talking middle-aged, slightly balding, wearing a button-down shirt that was one size too big. He had a briefcase, for crying out loud. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at this guy, trying to figure out what he had that I didn't. They went inside. I waited, debating whether to go in after them, but then I saw something better. The cafe had outdoor seating. And lucky for me, Amy and her special friend chose a table right by the window. I grabbed a hat from the passenger seat, pulled it low over my face, and walked over to a nearby bench. I wasn't exactly a professional spy, but I did my best to look like some guy just enjoying the fresh air. Then, I listened. It started off normal. Work talk. How's life? The usual boring small talk. Then he lowered his voice, and I had to lean in a little. So, he said, tapping his fingers on the table, "Does he know?" Amy shook her head, stirring her drink like it was the most interesting thing in the world. "No. He has no idea." I froze. "Good," the guy said, nodding. It's better that way. Amy sighed. I don't know. It's getting harder to hide. I feel like I'm lying every day. You are lying every day, I wanted to say, but I kept my mouth shut. He leaned forward. If you want out, you know I can help. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. Out? Out of what? Amy rubbed her forehead. I don't know. I just... Her phone buzzed, and she grabbed it. Whatever she saw made her frown, and she immediately stood up. I have to go. She grabbed her purse, barely looking at the guy as she hurried off. He sat there for a second, then pulled out his own phone and started typing something. I watched Amy walk back to her car, my mind spinning. I still didn't have the full picture, but I had enough to know that my marriage was sitting on a ticking time bomb. And I had a feeling it was about to explode. There's a special kind of rage that comes from knowing someone is lying to your face while they smile at you like you're a moron. That was the exact feeling I had when Amy walked in the door that night like everything was fine. She kicked off her shoes, tossed her purse on the counter, and gave me that usual exhausted sigh, like her day had been so much harder than mine. Long day, she muttered, stretching her arms. I just stared at her. Long day. Yeah, running around town with some guy in a button-down must be exhausting. I wanted to say something right then and there, but I held it in. If I was going to get the truth, I needed to be smart about it. People don't just confess because you ask them nicely. They confess when they think you already know. So I played along. Yeah, I asked, setting my phone down like I hadn't spent the last hour debating whether to scroll through her texts while she was in the shower. Anything interesting happen? Amy shook her head, opening the fridge. Just work stuff. I nodded. Work stuff. Classic answer. Hard to prove wrong unless I suddenly became an expert in dental office politics. She grabbed a bottle of water and leaned against the counter. You. I shrugged. Same. Nothing exciting. We stood there, silent for a second. She took a sip of water. I watched her, waiting for some flicker of guilt. Nothing. So, what do you want to do for dinner? She asked, completely unfazed. I resisted the urge to laugh. Maybe that was the worst part, how easy it was for her. I had spent the whole day unraveling our marriage in my head, and she was standing there debating between takeout and leftovers. Not really hungry, I said, which was true. It's hard to eat when you're trying to figure out whether your wife is planning to leave you or just having a casual fling. Amy just nodded, grabbing her phone off the counter. And just like that, the conversation was over. That was how the next few days went. Me pretending I didn't know anything, her pretending she wasn't sneaking around. I watched for signs, texts she tilted her screen away to answer, sudden errands that took longer than they should, the way she hesitated before answering simple questions. The problem was, I still didn't know what exactly I was dealing with. Was it a full-blown affair? Some weird secret business deal? Was she running a dental hygiene smuggling ring? I needed proof, and I knew exactly where to get it. Amy was a lot of things, but careful wasn't one of them. She had never been the type to worry about covering her tracks, mostly because I had never given her a reason to think I'd check. So when she left her laptop open one night, I waited until she was in the shower, then sat down at the kitchen table and clicked on her email. Now, before anyone gets on their moral high horse about privacy, let's be real. She lost the right to privacy the second she decided to start living a double life. I scrolled through her inbox. Most of it was boring, work emails, online shopping confirmations, some newsletter about improving your posture, which was ironic, considering how often she slouched on the couch. But then I saw it. A chain of messages under a name I didn't recognize. I clicked. And just like that, everything clicked into place. It wasn't some romantic love affair. It wasn't a business deal. It was money. Amy was transferring money to this guy. Not just once, but multiple times over the last few months. A few hundred here, a few thousand there. And the most recent transfer? $5,000. I sat back in the chair, rubbing a hand over my face. So that was what this was. Some kind of financial mess she had gotten herself into. But the question was, why? I heard the shower turn off, and I quickly closed the laptop. I needed more before I confronted her. A reason. A connection. A way to make her admit the truth without her twisting it into something else. And that's when I remembered something. Amy had a separate bank account, one she had opened before we got married. She had always kept some money in it, just in case, but we had never really talked about it. I grabbed my phone and did a quick search. Turns out, her bank had an app. And lucky for me, she had used my laptop to log in before. I opened the saved passwords, clicked the login, and there it was. $12,000. Gone. In the last 6 months. I stared at the screen, my hands tightening around the phone. She wasn't just hiding something from me. She was using our money to do it. And that was worse than anything I had expected. I had about 100 questions, but the one that stuck out the most was, how stupid did Amy think I was? 12 grand gone, and she hadn't even tried to hide it. No secret offshore account, no fake business receipts, not even the basic effort of withdrawing small amounts over time. Just straight-up wire transfers, like she was paying off a contractor for remodeling the house I didn't know we were renovating. I sat there staring at the screen, debating my next move. I had options. I could wait and see how far she'd go. I could walk right up to her, phone in hand, and watch her scramble for an excuse. Or, my personal favorite, I could start making her feel like she was losing control of whatever little scheme she was running. So, I picked the third option. Amy had this habit. Whenever she was nervous, she over-explained things. Normal people lie with short, direct answers. Amy, on the other hand, gave you a 5-minute speech filled with useless details that didn't help her case. It was like watching a bad improv performance where the actor just kept making it worse for themselves. I wanted to see just how much of a mess she'd make when she thought she was about to get caught. I waited until she got out of the shower and settled onto the couch, scrolling through her phone like a person with absolutely nothing to hide. Then, casually, I walked over and sat down next to her. Hey, I said, keeping my tone light. We should go over our finances soon. She barely looked up. Why? Just making sure everything's in order. You know, with bills, savings, all that. Now she looked up. Not much, but enough. I thought you handled all that? I do. But I was thinking it'd be good for us to go through it together, just to make sure we're on the same page. Her fingers tightened around her phone. Did something happen? Nope. I smiled. Just being responsible. She nodded, but her whole posture shifted. It was subtle, her shoulders tensed, her phone suddenly became the most interesting thing in the world, and she let out one of those fake, casual sighs. Yeah, sure. We can do that sometime. Sometime. Otherwise known as never. I leaned back. Actually, I was checking our accounts today. Noticed some transfers I didn't recognize. You know anything about that? Boom. There it was. That tiny flicker of panic in her eyes. She covered it quickly, but I caught it. Transfers, she repeated, like I had just spoken in a foreign language. Yeah, a few thousand here and there. I kept my tone neutral. Thought maybe you knew what it was for. She blinked. Oh, yeah, that's And here it came. The over-explaining. Well, so, you remember how I told you about Melissa's situation? Melissa. That was a new one. She was dealing with that whole thing with her ex, Amy continued, now speaking at twice her normal speed. And she needed a lawyer but didn't have the money, and I felt bad because she helped me out with that thing last year, so I figured. Wait. I held up a hand. Melissa. Yeah, she nodded quickly, relieved I was keeping up. You remember Melissa? I did. She was Amy's coworker. Married. Probably had no idea she was being used as a human shield in this conversation. So, you sent Melissa. What? Alone. Amy nodded. Exactly. Just a temporary thing. She's paying me back. I pretended to think about it. And you didn't mention it because... She let out another fake sigh. Because I knew you'd overreact. Overreact? I raised an eyebrow. Amy, $12,000 is missing from our account. That's not an overreaction. That's basic math. Well, when you put it like that, there's no other way to put it. She folded her arms, like I was the problem here. I was trying to help a friend. I nodded slowly. So, if I call Melissa right now, she'll confirm this? Silence. A long one. Amy wasn't stupid. She knew Melissa would have no idea what I was talking about. And now she was trapped in her own bad excuse, trying to figure out whether to double down or backtrack. Then, in a move so predictable it almost made me laugh, she went for the classic shift the blame strategy. Why are you interrogating me? She snapped. Do you not trust me now? Oh, I trust you, I said. I just don't trust whatever this is. She scoffed. So what? I need permission to spend my own money? Our money, I corrected. And yes, when 5 grand is leaving our account at a time, a little heads up would have been nice. She shook her head, standing up like she was done with the conversation. I can't believe this. I thought we were partners. I thought you trusted me. She was good. I'd give her that. But not good enough. Where are you going? I asked. I need some air. And with that, she grabbed her keys and walked out. I didn't bother stopping her. I had all the confirmation I needed. Now, I just had to figure out who the guy on the other end of those transfers really was. People like Amy don't break under pressure. They slither around it. That's the thing about liars. If you don't catch them outright, they find a way to make you the problem. And that's exactly what she was trying to do. First, she threw out the classic, "You don't trust me" line. Then she stormed off dramatically, like I was the one who needed to be sorry. If I hadn't just caught her in a lie, I might have actually believed she was the victim in all of this. But I wasn't stupid. Amy was hiding something. And at this point, I wasn't just going to find out what it was. I was going to make sure she regretted ever thinking she could get away with it. I sat down at my laptop and pulled up the bank transfers again. The money had been sent to an account under the name Paul Gaines. No businesses, no fancy corporate names. Just a plain old personal account. That meant I was dealing with one of two things. Either she was paying off some guy for a reason she didn't want to admit, or she was being scammed. And frankly, if my wife was fool enough to fall for an internet con artist, that would almost be more embarrassing than the alternative. I did a quick search for the name. It didn't take long to find a Paul Gaines who lived in town. 39 years old. A history of business ventures that all seemed to end with lawsuits. A guy who had been sued 3 times for fraud but somehow kept dodging real consequences. Perfect. I wasn't about to go knocking on his door and asking nicely. I had a better idea. Amy thought she was playing a game. She thought she was keeping secrets. What she didn't realize was that she wasn't the only one who could play dirty. I grabbed my phone and made a call. "Hey," I said when the line picked up. "Remember that favor you owe me?" 20 minutes later, I had everything I needed. Paul Gaines was exactly the type of guy I expected him to be, one of those smooth-talking morons who thought he was smarter than everyone else. He ran a few sketchy investment companies, convinced people to dump money into fake projects, then conveniently disappeared when it came time to deliver results. He also had a habit of stringing along women who had more money than sense. And guess what? Amy had been sending him thousands. Now I just had to figure out if she was getting scammed or if she was willingly funding whatever nonsense Paul was up to. Either way, she was about to have a very, very bad week. Amy didn't come home until late. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through emails, pretending I wasn't waiting for her to walk through the door. When she finally did, she barely looked at me. "You okay?" I asked, all casual. She sighed dramatically, like she was the one with trust issues. "I just needed some space." I nodded. "Cool. By the way, who's Paul Gaines?" Her entire body tensed. "What? Paul Gaines?" I repeated, still not looking up from my phone. "The guy you've been sending money to." Silence. Then, "That's none of your business." That made me laugh. Out loud. "None of my business?" I put my phone down, finally looking at her. "Amy, you sent him our money." "I told you. I was helping a friend." "No. You told me you were helping Melissa." She blinked. Realized she had already ruined that excuse. I didn't give her a chance to recover. "Paul's not your friend. He's a scam artist. A bad one, actually." I did some checking. I smiled. Not exactly the type of guy you'd want to be wiring thousands of dollars to. Amy's face twisted like she was trying to decide which excuse to use next. I leaned forward. "So, let's make this simple. Either you tell me what's really going on, or I start making phone calls. And trust me, Amy, you don't want to know what happens when I start making phone calls." That did it. She panicked. "It's not what you think," she blurted out. "It's complicated." "Good," I said. "I love complicated. Start talking." And that's when she finally admitted it. Paul wasn't just some random scammer. Amy had met him at work. He was a patient. A charming one, apparently. One who somehow convinced her that he had a business opportunity she just had to be part of. Something about real estate, flipping properties, making easy money. "And you believed him," I said, deadpan. She crossed her arms. "It wasn't like that." "Oh, no." I gestured at my laptop. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like that." She huffed. "I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd react like this." "React like what?" "Like a guy whose wife has been secretly funneling money to some fraud." Her silence was all the answer I needed. I stood up. "You're fool, Amy." She gasped. "Excuse me." "No, really. You fell for a scam. A bad one. And you thought you could just hide it? What was the plan here? You thought I'd never notice." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "Yeah, that's what I thought." I grabbed my phone. "I'm fixing this." Amy's face went pale. "What are you doing?" "Calling the bank." I smirked. "And after that?" "I'm calling Paul." Now she looked really scared. "Jacob, wait." But I didn't wait. Because Paul? He was about to get a call he definitely wasn't expecting. Some men, when they find out their wife has been lying to them, take the high road. They walk away, wish her the best, and move on with their lives. I am not one of those men. Amy wanted to play games? Fine. I had a game of my own. I wasn't just going to leave her. That was too easy. I was going to make sure that by the time I was done, she'd regret every decision that led her to think she could get away with this. First, I made the call to the bank. It turns out, when someone wires money to a known fraud, the bank is very interested in hearing about it. A few polite but firm words about potential financial crime had them reviewing every single transfer Amy had made. They froze the last one, flagged her account, and told me they'd be looking into whether fraud charges could be pursued. Amy, meanwhile, was pacing the living room, her hands gripping her hair like she was trying to stop her brain from melting out of her skull. "You didn't have to do that," she hissed, as if she was the victim in all this. "Didn't I?" I leaned against the counter, watching her unravel. "Because I feel like I did." She turned to me, arms crossed. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone. "Because Paul's about to find out how proportionate this is." Her face went white. "Jacob, don't." I pressed dial. Paul answered on the third ring. "Who's this?" "Hey, Paul," I said, my voice as casual as if we were old friends. "It's Jacob. You know, Amy's husband." Silence. "Then, listen, man. I don't. I just wanted to let you know the bank's on to you," I cut in. "They've frozen the transfers, flagged Amy's account, and now they're looking into whether you committed fraud." Paul didn't say anything, probably because he was busy regretting every life choice that had led him to this moment. "By the way," I continued, "Amy told me everything. About your little business opportunity. About how you convinced her to send you thousands of dollars. So now, I have to decide, do I let the bank handle this, or do I make some calls of my own?" Paul found his voice. "Listen, I don't want any trouble." "Oh, you have trouble," I said cheerfully. "The only question is how much. Now, you could give the money back. That'd be a start." Or, I continued, I could start sending out copies of these transactions to a few people. Maybe some clients of yours? Maybe your landlord? Maybe that judge who ruled against you in your last fraud case." Now he really didn't know what to say. I gave him a second to stew in his own panic before adding, "You have 24 hours to send back every penny. If you don't, you'll be hearing from a lot more people than just me." I hung up before he could answer. Amy stared at me, horrified. "You just threatened him." I shrugged. "Did I? I just gave him options." She sat down, rubbing her temples. "Do you even hear yourself?" "All I hear," I said, "is my wife scrambling to justify being a moron." Amy groaned, like I was exhausting her. "Jacob, we can fix this." That made me laugh. "We?" "Amy, there is no we anymore." She flinched. For the first time since this whole thing started, I saw real panic in her eyes. Like she had just now realized that her marriage was over. "Wait," she stood up, hands in the air. "Let's talk about this." "I don't think we have much to talk about." I walked past her, grabbing my jacket. "I'll be staying somewhere else. You can have the house for now. But don't get too comfortable." She followed me to the door. "Jacob, please. I made a mistake." "No," I corrected, opening the door. "You made a series of mistakes." I stepped outside, then turned back to her. "And now? You get to live with them." Then I shut the door in her face. By the time I got to my truck, I saw a notification on my phone. A new email. From Paul. It was a bank transfer confirmation. $12,000. Refunded. I smirked. Looks like at least one person had gotten the message. Amy, though? She was about to learn the hard way that some betrayals come with consequences. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel